Back in Crestwood, the trial's broadcast had the town frozen in a strange suspension. Shops closed early and schools dismissed their classes as everyone congregated to witness the singular event that promised to redefine their town's history. The figure of Penelope in the proceedings was a familiar one, her notorious columns having jump-started the town's awareness about the case's far-reaching implications. The atmosphere throbbed as she navigated the charged courtroom, diving in and out of tricky webs of testimonies and cross-examinations. As the town awaited each statement with bated breath, Grace found herself warily optimistic about the turn of events. The newfound evidence, combined with the exposure of questionable investigative practices, had the prosecution's case trembling on the precipice of collapse. Sitting alongside Tom Harrison, her hopes rose with each scoffed objection from the prosecution, each assertive argument from the hard-pressed defense attorney. Yet, with every hopeful surge, a shadow of doubt unfailingly crept in: her father's inheritance, the familiar scrunch of worry on Oliver's forehead, the unsettling recollection of Fred Turner. Meanwhile, within the sprawling premises of Lockhaven, the inmates clung to every piece of information that floated in about the ongoing trial. Oliver's potential resurgence to freedom had come to symbolize a beacon of hope, an unparalleled victory against the system they had all succumbed to. For Marcus, Oliver's predicament held a reflection of his own disgraced past, one he had come to terms with within the prison walls. The prospect of his cellmate's redemption evoked a myriad of emotions. It was hope and regret, joy for his friend's newfound chance, and the remorse of a future he himself had foregone. The avenue of information was prized open for Fred Turner. His exposure to the maze of information and speculations took a heavy toll. However, Fred found himself unable to detach from the magnetic pull of the trial. The stranger he had met in Oliver, the friend he remembered, and the alleged killer he feared. It was an inescapable quagmire of mixed feelings and suppressed guilt. By sunset, the first official day of the retrial concluded, sending palpable waves of anticipation coursing through the veins of Crestwood. It marked the unveiling of the twisted masterpiece that could either untether an innocent man or leave him forever marred by the upheaval. As the second day of the trial rolled in, Crestwood held its collective breath. The town's heartbeat echoed in the tense courtroom filled with spectators, lawyers, the jury, and one man whose life hung in the balance: Oliver Kane. The previous day's events, a blur of prosecutorial objections and piercing detectives' testimonies, had left a significant bruise on the established conviction narrative. Lawyer Tom Harrison's relentless attack on prosecution's misleads and alleged manipulation of evidence had cast a shadow of doubt over the case, making it impossible to overlook any longer. Grace, wringing her hands nervously in the observer's gallery, couldn't help but feel unmoored by the chain of events. The newfound evidence, her husband under trial, and a strange connection to Fred Turner, all of it spun into a vortex where truth danced just out of reach. Throughout the proceedings, her determined gaze never left Oliver. Sitting across the room, clad in a borrowed suit and an expression of guarded hope, he seemed a world away from the confident, caring man she had married. But the resolve in his eyes, the same that had guided them through life's trials before, held her steady amidst the churning tide. In the piercing spotlight of the courtroom, Oliver sat silently, listening to speculative assessments of his character, mumblings of incriminating testimonies, and the relentless call of justice, all seemingly fading into the cacophony of the moment. Back in Lockhaven Prison, the inmates leaned closely to their radio, the buzz of the trial overshadowing the mundane narrative of their caged lives. Each update, comments on lawyers' performance, fresh testimonies, or crackling observations, bolstered their rekindled belief in a severe system that had failed them repeatedly. Marcus, in his quiet corner, found himself contemplating the unusual camaraderie stirring between the hardened inmates. For Oliver's case was not merely a fight for one man's freedom, but a damning reflection of their own grim realities. Amidst the unfolding drama in the courtroom and the rippling waves of change it incited, whispers of a silent tremor began echoing within Penelope's investigative threads. Fred Turner, once a supportive friend and now a potential suspect, found himself under the mounting weight of media scrutiny. Years of resentment buried under Crestwood's idyllic visage were churning into a storm that threatened to sweep away the lives of those entangled in this case. While the day drew to a close, the tremors caused by the reopening of the trial were far from over. Unveiled truths, half-spoken speculations, buried resentments, and haunting memories intertwined, creating complex patterns in the fabric of Crestwood's reality. Day 3 of the trial dawned bright, casting long shadows across Crestwood town. The tranquility of the morning belied the tempest brewing within the considerably crowded courtroom. As the stakes of the trial rose, so did the complexity of feelings harbored by the town's residents. Detective Harrison, having painstakingly unpacked the previous trial's inadequacies, was bolstered by a newfound sense of righteousness. His conviction in Oliver's innocence had grown stronger with every neglected lead he dug up and each piece of overlooked evidence he presented before the jury. Each misstep in the original process reflected the flawed design he had fought against his entire career. Grace watched from the gallery as Harrison, the man she had initially perceived as a roadblock, took center stage in their fight. His unwavering pursuit of truth, while rattling her with its implications, had also earned her respect. Outside the courtroom, Crestwood's once unified facade of discontent concerning Oliver's fate began showing cracks. Opinions clashed and divided, causing shifts in town dynamics as the man under question steadily transformed from pariah to a victim of the system. While Crestwood adapted to this new rhythm, the residents of Lockhaven Prison held their breath collectively. Every update from the trial seeped into the prison's sterile routine, puncturing the monotonous drone of their existence with the audacious notes of hope and defiance. Marcus, Oliver's consistent companion in this ordeal, found himself acting as a mediator between the inmates' newfound fervor and Oliver's persistent resilience. Continuously enveloped by intense discussions concerning Oliver's innocence, a shift in Marcus's alignment towards Oliver's cause became increasingly apparent. Fred Turner, once a spectator of the unfolding narrative, now found himself drawn into a spiraling vortex of scrutiny. His past association with Oliver, coupled with Penelope's insinuations, brought the unwelcome attention of the media spotlight on him. Facing a barrage of pointed accusations, Fred's carefully constructed complacency began to crumble. Amidst growing tensions and fluctuating allegiances, the trial seemed to churn the prevailing narrative constantly. The truth, once erroneously believed to be alleviated, plunged back into murkiness, continuing the fight between deception and denial. On the fourth day, as every overcast cloud seemed to cast a pall over Crestwood, the trial coerced these somber shadows into the courtroom. Rumors sibilated through Crestwood streets, trickling into the courthouse as Oliver Kane's story tread deeper into uncharted territory. The once certain enemy now had a face, the systemic injustices personified in the overlooked evidences, alternative suspects not pursued, and muted voices straining to be heard. Detective Harrison, now more than ever, bore the crushing weight of redeeming an innocent man entrapped in the merciless gears of a defective system. Yet, even as the evidence mounted in favor of Oliver, apprehension haunted those closest to the case. Grace found her resolve hardened at the edges, her heart constantly at odds with the whirlwind of emotions engulfing her. The hope of seeing her husband absolved battled the fear of unforeseen adversity lurking at every turn of their fight for justice. Fred Turner, once an embittered observer, now resembled a defendant himself in the hinted allegations of potential involvement. As Crestwood and the national audience dissected his connection to the case, Fred grappled to maintain a veneer of nonchalance, his once ignored life under relentless scrutiny. Within the sterile confines of Lockhaven, the trial had become an obsession. Inmates huddled together, analyzing every new piece of information about the case. Oliver, the man in question, found himself both a participant and observer, his hope for justice brushing against the cynical acceptance of the prison's grim reality. However, it wasn't just the illustrate fight against guilt reflected in Oliver's case that stirred their grudging respect. It was also the man himself, a reluctant beacon of resistance, of hope, in their resigned existence. The synchronized rhythm of Crestwood and Lockhaven's interest in the case was echoed in the solitary figure of Penelope. Seated always at the back of the courtroom, she documented every revelation, every countenance shift, and every whispered conversation, maintaining her journalistic duty alongside her drawn weight in the revelations, every countenance shift, and every whispered conversation, maintaining her journalistic duty alongside her instinctive empathy towards the accused. The fetters of truth were being forcefully loosened, and the unraveling reality no longer binding Oliver in an impenetrable shroud of guilt. The fetters of truth were being forcefully loosened, and the unraveling reality no longer binding Oliver in an impenetrable shroud of guilt. As the trial stretched into its fifth day, Crestwood found itself grappling with a speculating storm that mirrored the brooding skies above. The case had transitioned from a regional scandal to a symbol of national introspection, its proceedings dissected thoroughly from breakfast clubs to the primetime news. Oliver Kane was no longer just a name, but a beacon in the fight against systemic corruption. His journey had unwittingly stirred a revolution, inspiring the common populace to question their role in perpetuating a flawed system. When the corruption went deeper than the surface, the ripples of doubt spread wider than envisaged. Sitting in the stifling courtroom, Grace found herself alternating between heart-wrenching fear and blind faith. With every passing question and counterclaim, her heart hazarded a peek at the horrifying potential of failure. Yet, the stalwart resilience radiating off Oliver across the aisle kept her anchored. Tom Harrison, the veteran detective, became an unexpected pillar in their wavering fortitude. In his relentless pursuit of truth, he embodied the much-needed hope for a justice system often overshadowed by corrupt practices. Every cracked lead, every unveiled evidence, rekindled a fire that was rapidly consuming the webs of deception woven around Oliver. Amidst the mounting anticipation, Fred Turner found himself unwittingly sucked into a vortex of piercing public scrutiny. Recollections about his past, once safely buried in nostalgic obscurity, were unraveled mercilessly, placing him under the daunting spotlight of suspicion. As the narrative danced on the precarious scales of truth and assumption, Lockhaven Prison mirrored Crestwood's anticipation. The inmates clung to every scrap of news, their perceptions swaying with each development reported. Marcus became the unlikely lighthouse amidst the capricious storm. His friendship with Oliver and his uncanny understanding of law entwined him deeper into the narrative, gradually cementing his support for Oliver's disputed innocence. Under the probing scrutiny lay the innocent memory of Ethan, the silent observer of the massive wave of change his death had unknowingly triggered. His absence, even more profound amidst the unfolding drama, was a continuous reminder of personal loss, a loss that was both a driving force and a haunting reminder. The ramifications of the unsettling narrative echoing through Crestwood's corners were not only felt on a societal level but also touched its residents personally. For many, Oliver's trial was not just a distilled fight against societal malaise but a symbolic struggle mirrored in their own lives. Having been cast inadvertently into the spotlight, Fred Turner found himself in uncharted territory. Each undisclosed detail teased into the public underscored the unsettling gap between perception and reality. As his past association with Oliver examined under the microscope of public opinion, Fred's quiet solace was replaced by an unnerving uncertainty. The ringing allegations against Fred began raising some uncomfortable questions. If the suspicions voiced by Detective Harrison and perpetuated by Penelope were indeed valid, was Crestwood nurturing a potential criminal unsuspectingly? For Grace, Fred's emergence as a potential suspect was both a source of hope and unease. While it increased the chances of Oliver's possible acquittal, she found herself grappling with the implications. A feeling of betrayal lingered as she delved into the web of overlapping pasts. Meanwhile, in the controlled chaos of the prison walls, the trial had become more personal. Oliver's innocence, though yet officially unproven, was gaining ground in the eyes of Lockhaven's inmates. Through Oliver, they saw their own tales of broken justice reflected. The fight was no longer solely about his case, but rested upon the broader issue of broken justice and institutional reform. Marcus, in his quiet corner, realized his alignment had irrevocably shifted towards his cellmate's cause. His belief in Oliver's innocence became a bedrock in the shifting landscape of the prison sentiment. For Oliver, the past and present collided in a whirlwind of revelations, familiar faces, and distant memories taking on newfound significance. Every unveiled detail about Fred Turner added another doubtful whisper to the already confused narrative. In Crestwood, anticipation grew with each passing day, fed by the dramatic twist in Oliver Kane's case. The once tranquil town was now buzzed with speculative whispers and debates as the clock relentlessly marched towards the trial's resolution. The townsfolk found themselves torn between contradicted past beliefs and unsettling new revelations that painted their calm suburban lifestyle in uneasy hues of shadow and light. Much like the shifting perception, Grace bore the brunt of uncertainty in her emotional journey. As the defense attorney dissected the prosecution's narrative, each unveiled truth felt like a double-edged sword, bringing hope for Oliver's acquittal but also a deeper dread about the implications for Fred Turner, a man once considered a friend. Aside from the personal turmoil, Grace gradually understood the broader societal implications at play. The spotlight on Crestwood exposed flaws in the justice system, offering a tangible look into the unseen battles of innocent lives tangled in the convoluted legal maze. Meanwhile, in Lockhaven, the feverish updates about Oliver's trial stirred pockets of discussion amongst the inmates. Their perspective gradually shifted as the depth of the prosecution's oversight came to light, casting Oliver in the role of an unsuspected underdog fighting a monumental battle. Also, the complexion of Oliver's confined existence began changing, the palpable sense of optimism falling into place like the dawn after an overlong night. Marcus found his involvement deepening beyond his initial counsel role. He became an unwavering pillar of support to Oliver, his silent strength and realistic optimism offering respite in a world that oscillated between heightened hopes and crushing despair. Within this storm, Fred Turner was thrust into a disorienting limelight. The speculative scrutiny of his association with Oliver rendered his past open to relentless questioning. Each unveiled fact deepened his involvement, adding to the growing narrative of suspicion against him. Oliver found himself on an emotional roller coaster within the confines of his prison cell. Hope, fear, doubt, and sadness jostled within the narrow space of his thoughts, occasionally breaking through his calm facade. Day 6 of the trial crept in, accompanied by a flurry of Crestwood's excited whispers. The narrative was no longer confined to Oliver Kane's disputed guilt. It had surged to become a study of the justice system under public scrutiny, with Crestwood Town at its epicenter. All awaited the presumable tidal wave that the trial was gearing towards, a wave that promised to wash over and redefine the landscape that had remained constant for years. Grace found herself burned and reshaped by the crucible of the trial. With every unveiled truth came the dichotomy of hope and fear, unique to those awaiting justice. The mounting evidence against Fred Turner brought a relief tainted with dread. Frayed edges of the past unraveled, releasing a flood of haunting reminiscence. An underlying disquiet nagged at her subconscious, which other familiar faces hid beneath masks of deception. Over time, her emotional turmoil materialized into a hardened resolve. Justice was no longer just a personal wish, it was a collective aspiration of an awakened community. Through Oliver's fight, Crestwood had been forced to face its buried demons, and Grace, in her small part, had become an emblem of this broader retribution. Meanwhile, Lockhaven hummed with tangible anticipation. A sort of solidarity, foreign but welcome, seemed to bind the inmates. Oliver was no longer just a co-prisoner. He was an embodiment of their stifled voices, a beacon in their universal march towards justice. The mood within the stark prison walls fluctuated, mirroring the ebb and flow of the trial. Every conjecture, questioning, and contradiction fueled their collective hope and deepening respect for the enigmatic man that was Oliver Kane. Marcus found himself profoundly affected by the changing tide. The stoic acceptance he had distilled over the years seemed to waver, stung by the raw ambition of hope. Despite the daunting odds, a part of him began aligning with a future where Oliver walked free, offering an alternative narrative to those trapped within the system. As the trial progressed, Oliver found himself oscillating between fear and hope. A primal instinct yearned for the truth while grappling with the abysmal terror of its implications. He wore his stoicism like armor, his deep-set eyes reflecting a storm only he was privy to. As the trial entered its 7th day, Crestwood seemed to hold its collective breath in anticipation. Each player, from loyal townsfolk to transient media, sensed the critical juncture that Oliver Kane's case had reached, a judicial pivot point that would soon seal the fate of a man whose story had become inexorably woven into the fabric of the community.